The world of cinema fell silent the day Diane Keaton left it. Her laughter, once echoing through decades of film, faded into a hush that no applause could fill. Outside her Brentwood home, the candles kept burning, their flames trembling in the evening wind. Bouquets piled against the gate, each flower a whisper of gratitude, each note a fragment of heartbreak. Headlines mourned her brilliance. Fans posted black and white photos, calling her the soul of sincerity. But inside that quiet house, the grief was deeper, sharper, because someone who knew her not as a legend but as a mother was about to speak. For the first time, Dexter Keaton, the daughter Diane had raised with endless love, stepped into the light of her mother's absence. Her voice trembled as she revealed what no headline ever told, that behind every smile there was a loneliness no one dared to see. And it leaves one haunting question echoing in every heart that loved her work. How could Hollywood's most loved woman die, feeling so completely alone? Dexter's words trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of truth. She said her mother had mastered the art of pretending to be fine, smiling for cameras, cracking witty jokes on talk shows, always the charming Diane the world adored. But behind that polished laughter was a silence that stretched for miles. Every night, when the world turned off its lights, her mother would retreat to her room, pour herself a cup of cold tea, and sit by the window for hours, watching the city breathe. She loved deeply, Dexter said, but she feared being loved back. It was as if Diane had spent her entire life giving pieces of herself to others, to her roles, to her children, to the audiences who worshipped her, yet never believing she deserved to keep any love for herself. She was the woman who played romance on screen but built walls off it. To millions, she was the embodiment of freedom, humor, and grace. To those closest to her, she was a gentle storm, someone whose heart never stopped reaching out, even when it had been broken too many times. There were nights when Dexter would find her mother staring at old photographs, her fingers brushing over faces from another life. When asked if she missed anyone, Diane would only smile and say, "We all have ghosts, sweetheart. Some of them are kind enough to stay." But in those few words lived a lifetime of ache, a love story the world had never been told. Because somewhere in that quiet house, behind closed doors and forgotten scripts, lay a secret Diane had guarded for decades, a secret that would soon fall into her daughter's hands and change everything Dexter thought she knew about the woman who raised her. And it began with a single, hidden notebook tucked deep inside her mother's study. Dexter found it by accident, a worn leather-bound notebook tied with a silver ribbon, hidden beneath a stack of old scripts. The edges were frayed, the pages smelled faintly of perfume, as if the air itself had kept her mother's scent alive. For a long time, she just stared at it, afraid to open something that felt too sacred to touch. But curiosity and grief always find their way in. On the very first page, her mother had written one line that stopped her cold. "I loved him with everything I had." And below it, again and again, one name. Al. The words that followed were not the voice of an actress or an icon. They were the voice of a woman who once believed love could save her. Diane wrote about their early days in New York, when she laughed too loudly, and he looked at her as if the world had gone still. She remembered nights driving through Los Angeles with Sinatra playing on the radio, her feet on the dashboard, his hand resting quietly over hers. But then, page by page, the light faded. Diane wrote about unanswered calls, the empty chair across from her dinner table, the mornings she waited by the phone, rehearsing sentences she'd never get to say. She confessed her fear that if she reached out one more time, he'd disappear forever. And yet, when he returned, smiling as if he had never left, she forgave him every time. Then came the entries from Rome, written in uneven lines. "We lived in a villa overlooking the city," she wrote. "I asked him, 'Marriage or goodbye?' He said nothing, and that silence killed me softly like a knife." Dexter turned the last page and felt her heart splinter. Her mother had left Rome the next morning and never went back. She never saw him again. She never stopped loving him. When Dexter looked back, she realized her mother's greatest act of courage wasn't fame. It was love. At 50, Diane made a decision that stunned Hollywood. She adopted a child. No husband, no partner, no plan other than the certainty that her heart had room. She brought home a baby girl and named her Dexter Dean Keaton. "I don't need to give birth to her to be her mother," she told a reporter once. "I just need to love her." 4 years later, she did it again, adopting a baby boy named Duke. Friends said motherhood transformed her more than any Oscar ever could. The woman who once claimed solitude as happiness now found joy in school runs, bedtime stories, and laughter echoing through the kitchen. Every morning began with milk, toast, and a question she never forgot to ask. "What made you happy today?" For her children, she was safety itself, steady, playful, unpretentious. The legend who once stood beneath blinding spotlights now spent her nights reading fairy tales under soft lamplight, her voice calm and full of wonder. And yet, even as she built a world of peace for her children, an invisible ache shadowed her. A part of her still lived in that quiet place inside, the one she never let the world see. Because the pain that followed her wasn't only from the past. It lived within her still, in ways no camera could capture. But the illness that haunted her wasn't just physical. It was something she'd battled since she was 25. It was only after her mother's death that Dexter uncovered another set of diary pages, the ones she could barely bring herself to read. They weren't about fame or love. They were about hunger. Diane had written that she began battling bulimia at 25, long before the awards and applause. To the world, she was effortlessly beautiful, the woman who made awkwardness look elegant. But in private, beauty had become her punishment, a mirror that demanded perfection every day. In shaky handwriting, Diane confessed that her hunger wasn't for food at all. It was for peace, for love that stayed. "I eat to fill the emptiness of being unseen," she wrote. "Then I punish myself for wanting more than the world allows." Her daughter realized that behind every camera-ready smile had been a war no one could see, a battle between the woman, the world, adored, and the fragile soul who never felt enough. Dexter remembered nights when her mother would sit in silence by the window. The garden washed in yellow light, her face reflected faintly in the glass. She would hum to herself, fingers tracing the edge of her teacup, eyes fixed on the shadows moving across the roses. She never asked for comfort. She simply let the quiet carry her thoughts away. And in that stillness, Dexter finally understood what her mother had meant when she once said, "Beauty is a storm that never ends." For Diane Keaton, beauty had made her famous, and it had nearly destroyed her. And yet, even as her body weakened, she faced it all with grace. Her Brentwood home had always felt like sunlight captured in walls. Wide windows, soft music, and the smell of jasmine drifting through open doors. It was here that Diane chose to spend her final months, surrounded not by fame, but by the quiet she had once feared, and finally learned to love. Dexter and Duke took turns caring for her, brewing her morning tea, reading aloud from the newspaper, and playing the old jazz records she adored. Some days she would hum along, her voice fragile yet filled with the same calm strength that had carried her through every storm. Outside, the world mourned a legend. But inside that house, there were no camera crews, no crowds, no flowers from the studios that once fought for her name on their posters. There was only family. 2 children, their mother, and the gentle rhythm of time slowing down. Still, one silence hurt more than all the rest. Al Pacino's. The man who had once filled her pages, never called, never came, never said goodbye. Dexter admitted she never resented him for herself, only for the mother who had loved him so faithfully. The same mother who, even in her fading strength, refused bitterness. In her final days, Diane wrote one last note and tucked it beneath a photograph of her children. The words were simple, but they carried everything she had ever been. I have lived and I have loved. The rest, let the light keep for me. It happened at dawn on October 11th. The California sun rose gently over Brentwood, spilling gold through the curtains of her favorite room. Diane sat in her armchair, wrapped in her wool shawl, a half-finished cup of tea still warm beside her. Her glasses rested on an open journal, the last thing she ever touched. There were no cries, no pain, only stillness. It was as if she had simply drifted into the light she had always trusted. Dexter was the first to find her. For a moment, she thought her mother had fallen asleep. Then she noticed the peace in her face, the soft curve of a smile that said she had finally made her way home. That evening, the family gathered in the garden Diane had tended herself. Candles flickered under the tree she once planted, and soft jazz played from a small speaker. There were no cameras, no speeches, just quiet gratitude. The woman who had lived through storms was now part of the breeze that rustled the leaves above them. Outside those garden walls, the world began to mourn. Headlines filled every screen. Meryl Streep called her the compass of sincerity. Steve Martin remembered her laughter as the sound of courage. Al Pacino, the man whose name lived in her diary, released a single line that broke hearts across the world. She was the quiet mirror of my heart. That night, the Academy's tribute reel lit up theaters across the world. From Annie Hall to Reds, her smile, her voice, her humanity, all danced across the screen once more. And over the piano's final note, her own words played softly. Love is the greatest risk of all. But to understand Diane's legacy, you must first know how it began. Long before Hollywood called her a legend, she was just a girl named Diane Hall growing up in post-war Los Angeles, a city of sunshine, rules, and carefully painted smiles. Her father was a strict architect who believed discipline was love, and her mother, a former beauty queen, was a woman who shined briefly under the pageant lights before fading into domestic silence. From that polished world, Diane learned two things early: how to smile when her heart was breaking, and how to turn silence into strength. But she also made herself a promise. She would never live a life that looked perfect, but felt empty. So at 20, with a suitcase, a handful of savings, and a stubborn dream, she left everything behind and boarded a bus for New York City. There, she made her first act of rebellion. She dropped Hall and took her mother's maiden name, Keaton. It was both tribute and defiance, a way of saying, I'll carry you with me, but I'll do it my way. New York was cold, cruel, and merciless to dreamers. Diane lived in a tiny apartment with cracked walls and a heater that barely worked. She waited tables by day, auditioned by night, and sometimes slept with her coat wrapped around her like armor. She survived on tea and hope, writing her own monologues on napkins, convinced that someone, somewhere, would one day listen. Then came her first break, the Broadway musical Hair. Barefoot, terrified, and exhilarated, Diane walked onto that stage and felt something she had never felt before: freedom. Under those hot lights, she wasn't the quiet girl from Los Angeles anymore. She was a woman who could make the world listen simply by being honest. That performance changed everything. She had found her purpose. Not fame, not applause, but truth. And from that moment, every choice she made, every role she took, carried that same defiance. Because Diane Keaton wasn't built by comfort or privilege. She was forged in cold apartments, long nights, and endless auditions. A girl who turned solitude into fire. From freezing apartments to film royalty, her story was written in defiance. Fame didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, like dawn breaking through blinds, until one day, Diane Keaton woke up and realized the world knew her name. The Godfather made her a star, but it was Annie Hall that turned her into something larger than life. An icon of individuality, awkward charm, and effortless intelligence. She became the woman everyone wanted to be, the muse who could make even silence look magnetic. But behind that glow, there was exhaustion. The constant pressure to be brilliant, to stay relevant, to never falter. Diane was her own harshest critic, rewriting lines long after directors called it a day, memorizing scripts until sunrise, terrified of being anything less than perfect. Sleep became a stranger. "I don't rest," she once said in an interview. "I'm afraid that if I stop, it will all disappear." Her drive won her awards. Reds, Something's Gotta Give, timeless performances that proved her range and courage. Yet the spotlight that lifted her up also blinded her. She could make millions laugh on screen, but at home, the silence often felt louder than any applause. She poured everything into her work, and when the cameras stopped rolling, there was nothing left to give. Those who knew her best said Diane carried her success like a weight, grateful but wary. Every triumph reminded her how fragile it all was, how easily love and fame could vanish. And so she kept working, even when her heart begged for rest. Because for Diane Keaton, the stage was both salvation and prison. It gave her everything she ever dreamed of, and quietly took everything else. The higher she climbed, the lonelier it became. But from that loneliness, she built something eternal, a legacy that would outlast the noise, and a light that would never fade. Diane Keaton's legacy was never measured only in Oscars or fame. It was in the way she built her world, piece by piece, with her own hands. Her fortune, worth over $100 million, was entirely self-made, earned through decades of discipline, artistry, and quiet resilience. She restored historic homes, filled them with light and memory, and designed each room like a story, imperfect, soulful, alive. Her eye for architecture became an extension of her heart, taking what was broken and making it beautiful again. Her philanthropy reached beyond the screen, funding women's cancer research, historic preservation, and mental health causes, the very battles she had faced herself. Even in her absence, her home in Brentwood remains just as she left it. The sunlight on reclaimed wood floors, the scent of jasmine from her garden, the piano still open to her favorite song. Dexter and Duke decided not to change a thing. They said it didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a heartbeat that hadn't stopped. And when Dexter spoke one last time, she said, "My mother once told me that if she could choose again, she would still adopt me and Duke. I just wish I could tell her that if I could choose again, I'd still choose to be her daughter, even for one more day." So now, the question is yours. Who was Diane Keaton to you? A legend? A dreamer? Or just a woman who made you feel seen? Share your thoughts below and keep her light alive.